Um, got it. So we want to look at the ease of formation. We want to look at the cost of formation. There are legal implications based on how our business is structured. So there are protections that are available to us, or there's a lack of protections based on how the business is set up. There are also regulatory requirements that are based on strictly how the business is formed. As you'll find when we talk about the Corporate Transparency Act, there are tax implications, and it can also affect our access to capital. So what are the different types of business structures that are out there? So we're going to talk about the major types here. First is a sole proprietor, then there is a partnership, and then there's a corporation, and then there are specific limited liability companies such as a limited liability partnership and a limited liability company. Um, so this is kind of the overview of the types of business structures that are available to us here in the US. We're going to deep dive a little bit into each one of them now. So sole proprietorship. And I'm going to talk about each of these businesses. So most of these slides are going to look exactly the same. We're going to talk about the why this stuff is important as it relates to each one of these. So let me show you how easy it is to form a sole proprietorship. So I want everyone on the call, everyone in the meeting, I want you to think of a business idea that you want to do. All right, think of a business idea. Now I want you to think of a name for that business. And it doesn't have to be the one you keep. Just come up with a name right now for the business. Now I want you to do this. I want you to state out loud, say, I, and state your name, am now doing business to accomplish whatever you want the business to be under the name, whatever you pick the business name to be. Now, you just formed a sole proprietorship. You have created a business. It's your business. You are the only owner, the sole. It cost you zero to form it. Congratulations, everybody, you've just gotten a business. Now, what are the legal implications of this business? Well, there's a few legal implications here. One, the taxing authorities, legal authorities, the courts, nobody is going to see you any different than the business. You and the business are one and the same entity, is what we think about when we talk about these things legally. Who is the entity I'm interacting with? So you and the business are the same. Now, because you are a sole proprietor, there's a lot of things you don't have to do. You don't have to do the same reporting requirements that a corporation does. You are privately held, so you don't have to disclose who is there. You are who the beneficial owner of the business. Tax implications of that, your money made under the business is taxable to your individual income tax. And your access to capital, the banks are going to see the business as you and you as the business. So you will be limited to your own credit reports and your own credit background as to how you can get access to capital. However, there is one other little tax implication that I want to throw out there. And this kind of flies from my dear sister, Dr. Lynn Richardson's motto of everybody needs a home-based business. And the reason everybody needs a home-based business is because you can, having that home-based business, working it as a business, have the tax deductions against the business and offset the income that the business generates with the proper tax deductions. If you take a loss in that business, although if you're even trying to get a profit, but you don't, and you lose some money on paper, you can offset your regular ordinary income with the losses from the home-based business. Now, I am not a tax expert. I am not the tax guru, but if you want to learn more about why someone needs a home-based business, what the tax implications are, you can use that link at the bottom of the slide there, Building Wealth with the Pullums, which will direct you to Lynn Richardson's New Wealth University that has a ton of information on business taxes, business formations, and how these things interact and interplay with each other. So the next one is a partnership. So a partnership, the ease of formation is about as easy as forming a sole proprietorship, except for the fact that you and one or more other people have to agree that you're going into business to do the same thing. So you have to have multiple, it's two or more people who agree on what type of business they're going to do and what they're going to do as a business entity. And by simply agreeing and saying, yes, this is what we want to do, you form a partnership. Again, no real cost of formation there. You don't have to register a partnership with the state. You don't have to per se, people want to know, do you register it with the state? Do you register it with the county recorder? You don't have to do any of that. The one thing you are going to probably want to do, however, is you're going to want to put together what they call a partnership agreement. So you're going to want a document that tells how you're going to run your business, how the partners interact, how they get money in and out of the business. You're going to want to document all that because everything is fine and dandy when we all agree and we're all happy and everybody's in a kumbaya moment. When we start disagreeing, when actual real money starts flowing into the business, then you run into issues, and it's best to have the documentation on paper in writing as to how we really expect to run and manage our business, our partnership. Now, some of the legal implications of that, again, legally, the individual partners are no different than the business individually. An additional legal implication of this is that you as an individual are responsible for the actions of your partners. So you may be doing everything correctly and right and above board, and one of your partners messes up and does something illegal or incorrectly. You are still responsible for that partner's actions. So know who you're going into partnership with, strongly agree, know that you're really planning on going into partnership with them, and make sure that you then write down your partnership agreement and how you're going to conduct business, how you're going to assign liability, taxes, money, all those things. There aren't many regulatory requirements that apply to partnerships, at least in the state of Texas. That actually can change from state to state. Some states may want formal registration of a partnership, but most of them don't. In fact, some people can wind up in partnerships and not even realize that they have a partnership. So that, except for the fact that you're supposed to truly have some agreement of what you're doing and what type of business you're working on. The tax implications of a partnership: the partners are taxed as individuals. So the income that flows into the business, into the partnership, is attributed out to all the partners equally. and they are taxed as a part of their regular income stream. The access to capital can be a little bit different. The partnership, because the risk gets spread. Um, so you may get banks, lending institutions, others, venture capitalists even, but then you may get entities that are willing to provide access to more capital when there are partners, because there are more people that are responsible and on the hook for it. This is what I mean by that is when I mentioned the legal implications earlier, you are responsible for the actions of your partners. Well, if you borrow money in the side of a partnership, all of the partners are going to be responsible for that loan. So those people making those loans know I can go after the 2 people or 3 people or 5 people that are in that partnership if I need to try and get my money back. And that gives them better odds of getting their funds back if the loan is not repaid for whatever reason. So it can provide additional access to capital that a sole proprietorship may not get. So now let's talk about corporations. I'm taking them in this order for a particular reason, which we'll get to in a moment. So corporation's not as easy to form. You actually have to put together a document at your Secretary of State for the state, which is um, uh, a document that basically says these are our articles of formation, is what they're called, or articles of incorporation. So it basically, there's certain pieces of information that each state statutorily requires, or legally requires to know what the information is about the corporation. So they want you to put that information into a document. You have to file that document with the Secretary of State. There's usually a fee attached to it. And then you have to have what they call a registered agent. So the registered agent is someone who the term is can accept service, but basically it is the legal front man for the corporation. So that if someone wants to sue the corporation or otherwise send important documentation to the corporation and they don't have any other address they can find, they can go to the Secretary of State, look up the company, look up the corporation, and then send that to the registered agent for the corporation. And the presumption is that the registered agent will always know how to access the principles of the company. Now, the corporation forms a separate entity from the person forming it and from its shareholders. So we call it a virtual person, because it's a person in legal terms, but of course it's not an actual person. But it then has the rights of a person in legal terms. The corporation can go out and get loans and build its own credit and own things. So if the business fails, or the creditors of the business as it relates to the corporation, those creditors and those loans or whatever, they're only attributable to the corporation. That debt does not flow down to the shareholders. It doesn't flow down to the people that may have formed it or the officers. It's trapped within the entity of the corporation. So there's a big legal protection in terms of liability, because what the corporation does is very different from what you, the individual, does. However, regulatory requirements, I'm going to kind of combine, well, there are some regulatory requirements because there are things that corporations have to do now. They have to report data back to the federal government, to the state government. There's usually an annual reporting requirement for that the state requires. Um, and then the tax implications are a little different because there is what we call this double taxation that happens. So the double taxation is this: the corporation generates income, money flows in, and the corporation itself, because it is a separate legal entity, is taxed on the money that it made. Now, it can deduct its business expenses as well, but there is a tax on the corporation. Now, if there is money left over, if there are profits, and those profits then get distributed to the shareholders, then the shareholders are then taxed individually on those profits that are distributed to them from the corporation. So the same money coming in can be double taxed, is what we call it. So as you can imagine, that double tax is somewhat unfavorable, but after a certain point, it may make more sense to structure yourself as a corporation over one of the other business entities. Um, and there is a point in each individual case of what I might call diminishing returns, where it just makes sense to go to the other model. Um, and then access to capital, again, corporations, because they are their own person, they are their own entity, they can get access to capital that individuals may not be able to. You can sell shares, you can do bonds. So there are other things that you can do as a corporation for generating funds that you cannot do as an individual person. However, uh, there is also more scrutiny applied to that, especially to newer corporations, newer companies that haven't an established track record, that don't have a large revenue stream coming in. So there may be limits to what is possible to be loaned or borrowed, but you have other avenues of borrowing money besides just your traditional loan, such as stocks and bonds. Um, Corporations are also, because of that, considered either publicly or privately held. So if all of the stocks are held by private individuals and they are not traded on a public exchange like the New York Stock Exchange, the NASDAQ, where anybody can invest and buy, then it's privately held. If it is traded on a public exchange, if anybody can buy those stocks as an investment or bonds, um, then it's a publicly held company. In both cases, the corporation and its board of directors, but the people who run that corporation are responsible to the shareholders for that corporation. And there's additional regulatory requirements if the corporation is publicly traded versus privately held. So the Securities and Exchange Commission, because if you're publicly traded, you are basically an investment. There are regulations that you have to follow from the SEC. Again, other formation issues, and then you can have specialty types of corporations like nonprofit corporations. So a nonprofit corporation starts as a regular corporation and then applies to the IRS to receive a special tax-free status to become a nonprofit. So the purpose of the corporation is not per se to make money for the shareholders. The purpose of the corporation is to do something for the public good. And in exchange for that, the IRS says, fine, you don't have to pay taxes on a certain, most of the income being generated. Provided, again, a certain amount you can keep over your business expenses, but the purpose of the corporation can't be to go and make a profit. That especially if that profit goes to the benefit of any of the officers or shareholders. So next two slides are going to talk about limited liability companies and a little bit. The first thing is the limited liability partnership. So a limited liability company is something else that's going to have to be registered with the state. The partnership form still also has to be registered with the state. Uh, so there's a cost of formation. There's documentation that has to be filled out. And then you again want to put together your partnership agreement. The primary difference with the limited liability partnership versus a regular partnership is this thing of, if you remember, I said with a partnership, you're responsible for the actions of the other partners. A limited liability partnership actually reduces your responsibility and limits it, puts limits around it of your responsibility for the actions of the other partners, not per se for your own actions, but for the actions of the partners and for the actions of the company as a whole. So there is a limit of restriction as to how much risk you are at personally. More frequently, what we hear about now are LLCs, limited liability companies. And this is where a lot of people tend to start out. So limited liability company, again, the limited liability company came about to combine two of the nice things: the liability separation that you get from a corporation, but the tax structure, the single tax structure that you get out of a sole proprietorship. So the limited liability combines these things. So how do you form it? Again, you get articles of formation, you submit those to the Secretary of State, you pay a fee. So it's not exactly a low cost, or not exactly a high cost, but low cost or zero cost item. I can tell you here in Texas, most of these documents, either the articles of incorporation or the articles of formation for a limited liability company, there's like a $300 or so filing fee with the state, with the Secretary of State's office. And I typically charge about $350 to put together the documents, file the documents on your behalf, and build you an initial operating agreement or set of company bylaws, depending on which type of company you're forming. So there's some legal cost, but I mean, you can form one for under $1,000. The legal implications, you get the limited liability protection of a corporation. So whatever the limited liability company, the LLC, does, it's a separate entity. It is strictly what the LLC does. Nobody can come through the LLC if the LLC defaults on anything to come after its members beyond what money they've already invested in the LLC. They cannot come after your personal assets. They can't come after your house, your car, any money in your personal bank accounts. They can't do any of that. So you get the limited liability protections that a corporation offers. But the tax implication is that the taxing flows down to the individual members and flows into their individual income. So you don't have to pay limited liability company corporation tax. The business entity does not have to figure out the taxes as it relates to the business entity. It can simply pass the expenses and the income down to its members, and then they can figure it out individually on their own tax returns. LLCs have different ways to access capital. They're not publicly traded. They normally do not have stocks or bonds. They have membership requirements and the members invest money, invest capital into the business. And then as the LLC grows, of course, it can still go after loans and, uh, you know, investments, whatever. And it can do that as an independent entity, as the LLC. with the backing of its members, but the members aren't then individually responsible for any defaults or any lack of payments by the LLC. The members are only responsible to the amount of money they've already contributed to the LLC. So it's kind of the best of both worlds. It's what a lot of people started forming in the, I want to say in the 2000s, 2010 timeframe, realizing that we avoid that double taxation and you get the protections of a liability cover. So let's talk about that liability cover. And I'm going to stop for just a moment and kind of look into the chat just a minute. Okay, good. I don't see any questions there yet. So great. Make sure you're writing down your questions. We'll tackle them at the end in Q&A, but I just wanted to make sure there wasn't anything I missed so far because I know I've thrown a lot of information out there in a very short window of time. So let's talk about that veil of protection. And what we're looking at here is what's called the corporate veil. Corporate veil applies to LLCs and corporations. And that veil is what provides these limitations to liability. And what it basically means is that you know, a wedding veil where the bride comes out with a covering over her face until she gets to the altar. It's the same type of thing. There's a covering that corporations and LLCs get, which says it's not the people behind them that are liable for what happens, but the company itself, the thing that you see in front of you, is what is responsible, maintains the responsibilities for, like I said, for debts, for problems, whatever. And so this is where we get that liability protection from. This is where we get that virtual entity formation from. But there's a process that we have to follow to maintain it. And if we are not maintaining that veil properly, it can be what we legally call pierced. And they will look through the veil and ignore the corporate veil and instead look at the people behind it. So how do we maintain the corporate veil? Well, there are things that we have to do. You should definitely have your agreements, your operating agreement or bylaws in place for the entity that you're dealing with. You need to maintain what we call a corporate record book. It doesn't have to be anything fancy. I tend to use composition books for different companies. Like you can get at Walmart for $1, but there are formal corporate record books. So basically, when you are making decisions under these corporate entities, those decisions need to be written down. It needs to show that a meeting was held by the members of the board of directors or whoever the principals are of that entity. And they met, they decided, here's what the decision was, here's a signature and date of the secretary of that entity, of that corporation, or that LLC, basically saying this is what the body decided. Now, what that does is that shows a chain of decision making, that the entity is separate from the person making the decisions. And I'm going to confuse you even a little bit more, just bear with me, because when you're doing this under an LLC, there is something that is called a single member LLC. You can have an LLC that literally has one member in it. And people who are sole proprietors, to protect themselves and protect people from coming for their assets if something goes wrong, will sometimes put themselves into a single member LLC. And it's perfectly legit. All that single member LLC means is that you have to have a meeting with yourself, write down what you're planning on doing in your corporate record book, and sign off on the time, date, place, whatever, but make a notation in the corporate record book as to the decisions your LLC is making regarding its business and make sure that is documented. So if you treat the LLC as a separate entity from yourself, then the legal landscape will continue to see the LLC as a separate entity from yourself. If you are just kind of going in there and you're spending money out of the LLC's business accounts, and you're entering into agreements and you're signing your name, not your name, as the representative for whatever your LLC name is. If there are things you're doing like that, where you're not treating the LLC as a separate entity and you're not making decisions on its behalf, or you're not treating the corporation as a separate entity and the board of directors for that corporation are not making decisions on its behalf, then the courts, the legal system will look at that and say, that's just you putting up a straw man front for yourself. So we're going to look past what we normally call the corporate veil, pierce it, and we're going to look directly at you. And that's what we don't want to happen. So now let's talk about the Corporate Transparency Act. And I'm dedicating a little time to this because it's very, very important, I think, and it's a very recent change. So it was enacted as part of the National Defense Authorization Act in fiscal year 2021 that went into effect on January 1, 2021. Why do I think it's important for you to know that? Just so that you are aware, this is going to be my little political digression. Understand how the federal government and the state governments enact laws. They can put laws in the strangest places. And as long as the Congress debates them, the Congress passes them, and the president signs off on them, or the chief executive for whatever the entity is, if it's a state, that's the governor, signs off on the bill or otherwise gets through into law, it could be placed anywhere. You would think something like this would not be in defense authorization. You would think this would be in a financial crimes bill or I don't know, just anywhere, but this is the money we're allocating for the national defense, for the military and things of that nature. But they slipped this little piece of legislation in with that document. And there's a new element of it that went into effect starting this year, and it applies to these reporting organizations, LLCs, and corporations. The main requirement that we have to be aware of is that you have to disclose the beneficial ownership of the company. And we're going to talk about what that is. I'm going to go into a little more detail. And the penalties for non-compliance would be fines and or imprisonment. So let's talk about it. What has to be reported? Well, the beneficial ownership information. Well, what do they mean by that? Well, it's the names, addresses, date of birth, identifying numbers such as a license or passport number for those people who are beneficial owners of a corporation or an LLC. And realize that up till now, that information could be a lot of different things. So for example, some of these entities can actually hold each other. You could have a corporation called a holding corporation, and that holding corporation could own several LLCs, and each LLC could have a different business entity underneath it or do its different line of business. So the member in the LLCs would look like it's the corporation, the holding corp. And so it makes it difficult for those people who are trying to prevent money laundering and other white collar crimes to figure out who's really behind these things. And so that's why this type of legislation was enacted. So they get a better view into these companies to know who are the people really behind all of these companies and are benefiting from the money going through those companies' hands. You also have to report if there is a change in the basic information about the company, if there's a change in its beneficial owners, or its change in its status as a reporting company. So it changes to a business form where it does not have to report this information anymore, or it changes to a business form where it does have to start reporting this information and may not have. So, for example, if you take your sole proprietorship and now turn it into an LLC, you have now changed your status to one of a reporting company. So now you have to then put this information, send this information to where they want it to go. And where is that, you might be asking? Well, we'll get to that in a moment. I'm going to tell you first when it has to be reported. For any newly formed company, so any company formed after January 1, 2024, you have to report this information 90 days after receiving actual notice of your registration or the company creation. So I told you you have to fill out a articles of incorporation or articles of formation and send that to the Secretary of State, and you send it in with a fee. Well, that does not mean your LLC or your corporation is instantly created. It is not. They have to do some processing. They have to check the names. They have to do some stuff on the books and see uh, before they actually give you the certificate of you have been registered, you're created. So they'll do a little work beforehand. I've had that work take as little as a couple of days, 72 hours. I've had it take as long as 2 to 3 weeks. So it just depends. Um, but once you get that notice back that you have been properly formed and you are registered and the state is happy with you and you now exist as an LLC or a corporation, then you have 90 days to file this other documentation. For any pre-existing companies, so any companies that existed, LLCs or corporations prior to January 1, 2024, you have until January 1, 2025 to file the proper report. And then if there are changes, as I mentioned on the previous slide, you have to send an update within 30 days of that change. So if the beneficial owners change, if the status of the company changes from a reporting to a non-reporting or vice versa, then within 30 days after that change, you need to file an updated report. So where are we sending these reports? You send them to the area of the government is called FinCEN. It's a financial crimes enforcement network. It is an agency like the SEC and some of the others in the federal government. You can, I believe it's either going to be fincen.org or fincen.gov, but if you Google FINCEN or Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, you'll find their website. And of course, I know there's just those few people out there that are feeling rebellious, bratty, whatever you want to call it, and go, and if I don't report it, what are they going to do? Well, willful failure to report can generate fines of up to $500 a day until you do report it, or willful non-responsiveness to submitting the report, causing people to not submit the report, is also can generate criminal penalties up to 2 years in jail and or up to $10,000 in fines. So do with that information what you will. I personally would say report it. Don't spend a lot of time racking up charges that you really don't want to pay. So I'm going to open the floor to questions now. Um, if anyone has a question, you can raise your hand. In fact, I'm going to stop sharing so I get a better view of everyone that's in. Um, So a couple questions I know that were submitted from the preliminary session that I can take a little time to address. Can you have two businesses? Can you have two businesses in one, like the business side and the fiscal side? Um, and the answer to that is yes. You can have as many businesses as you want, and each one, the biggest thing that you have to do is you have to kind of keep the books and the behavior of each one separate. So, if you do bookkeeping as your home-based business and you're doing it under sole proprietorship, you can do it that way. And then you have another side business that's Uber, still based out of your house, but you're going and driving cars, um, or delivering food or whatever else. Um, you keep the expenses and income separated, keep the accounting separate, but you can definitely have more than one business. And you just wind up, especially on your federal taxes, you just wind up doing multiple Schedule Cs based on where the money comes from and then the expenses related to that side of the business. Another question that people asked in the preliminary sessions were, what is more beneficial, an S Corp, LLC, a sole proprietor for the film industry business? Here's what I'm going to say. I don't care what business it actually is. The thing that you have to look at from a legal perspective is, how risky is the business you're getting into? How likely are you to be sued because of something that you're doing within that business? Whether it's something you're doing right or something doing wrong, doesn't matter. But what's the likelihood of a lawsuit possibly coming out of that business? If you're in a more risky activity, then I would put that business into an LLC or corporation structure. Because that way, if someone does turn around and sue you and you happen to lose the lawsuit, the only thing at risk is whatever is already in that company. They cannot come after your personal assets. They cannot come after other businesses, personal accounts, anything of that nature. If it's not a very high risk business, if there's not a large likelihood of you being sued, then I'd say sole proprietorship is fine. Specifically to the film industry, I know if you want to better track the costs and expenses and funneling, you could form an LLC or corporation as a loan out company for you, the actor, or you, the producer, and have the film industry. You have the other entities within there. So the networks, the film producer, whoever, contract with your loan out company. And your loan out company is then responsible for making sure that you, the actor, appear where you're supposed to appear. So that's one way that you can kind of channel some of those funds off and then really track it well against the expenses. That's where I think an LLC or corporation structure might be beneficial for someone in the film industry. So it's the difference between them contracting directly with you, paying you, versus you're going to pay my management company, my loan out company, for my services. Any other questions? Well, I thank you everyone for your time and attention. Once again, I stopped sharing, but just to very quickly throw my information back up there for you. Um, So I am attorney Shawn Pullum. If you need a consultation, if you need some more information, I said at the beginning, I am an attorney. I am not per se your attorney, but I would love to be your attorney. If there's something that I can help you with, You can go to my Calendly link there at Pullum Law and book an appointment. You can look at the law firm's website to see what we do. That is my direct email address and my direct company line. So if you need to ask some questions, get an idea of something, you got a contract or something coming up and you'd like a review of it, please feel free to reach out to us, and we are happy to help. So with that, Jeanette, I think I'll turn the floor back over to you.
Okay, everybody, thank you so much. Thank you, Shawn, again for I'm sorry, y'all. I'm here at the hospital with my mom. But thank y'all so much for joining. Shawn, it was very informative. I do have there's a question. What okay. Okay, Evelyn said what you just said. Can you do that with a excuse me, a sole proprietor? Evelyn, could you elaborate or unmute? Okay, so so what he just said, what part did you can't unmute. Let me see. Hold on. Let's see. Maybe do we have them blocked out? Hold on. Just a second, y'all.
I got it. That's good. Unmute.
Okay, I'm unmuted now.
There you go.
Okay, when you were talking about what you just said, I was asking, can you do that with the sole priority? I forgot the words that you said because I was busy trying to unmute. Then I forgot you were talking and you were saying that well, the last thing you said, can you repeat that again? And what I was asking, can you do it with a sole priority? Because you had said the other LLC you could do it.
With the sole proprietorship, no.
Yes.
So yeah, you can't form a loan out company as a sole proprietorship per se, only because you and the company are the same thing.
Okay.
So as a sole, I mean, you could do business under that name, but it doesn't afford you any legal protections. So again, it's kind of looking at it like this. If the entity contracts with you, the individual actor, and something goes wrong on the shoot, or let's say, I can't think of his name now, but you know, the Spider-Man actor that always was leaking parts of the script or whatever else, they made a good joke out of it, but on the off chance, they decided to sue him for leaking because it violated their contract. If he contracted with them individually, they could come after him personally for as much as they wanted. But if he contracted with them to do that movie through his loan out company, then the liability stops with the loan out company. And so whatever, even though he may be the only beneficial partner of the loan out company, the only beneficial person within that loan out company, it's the money that he has in the loan out company that's at risk, not his own personal assets. So if you're a sole proprietorship, there's no shield, there's no difference between you and the business entity, where if you want some bit of a little bit of a shielding, and again, kind of for actors, my thing is that if you need to negotiate or play hardball, you could have a management company or your loan out company that's doing the hardball negotiation, you know, via email and whatever else, and they don't have to know that it's you particularly tied to it, because you can say that management company is asking it to be done this way, and then you get the benefit of just being the actor and saying, well, I'm glad you and my loan out company and my management company were able to come to an agreement. I'm here to work. Okay, good. Glad I can answer your question, Evelyn.
Twyla,
I'm a
did you have
popular.
a question? Okay, let's see, can we find Twyla and get her unmuted? Anyone else have a question? You're welcome to unmute.
Yeah, Shawn, I got a question.
All right.
Is it normal to be afraid of the IRS?
It's normal to be afraid of the IRS. Yeah, the IRS has definitely gotten a big bad boogeyman reputation over the years. But if you understand just a little bit about tax law, or get a tax professional kind of on your side, it's not much of a reason to really be afraid of the IRS. It's really just a bit about documentation, you know, keeping up with receipts, writing down things when it happens. A lot of times on the business side for business expenses, um, if you go out to lunch and you're discussing business with somebody else there, just keep the receipt, write the names down on the receipt as to who was in attendance and what you talked about, and then take a picture of it because the receipt's likely going to fade. And as long as you have, documentation, paperwork, you don't have to be afraid of anybody on the legal side. The thing of it is that that's a little bit of extra work, and a lot of us don't want to do that a little extra work to do that documentation and maintain that paperwork and keep that up and do that corporate record book. So yeah, the
Right.
more if you can get past that little hurdle of I don't want to do the little extra work, you'll find yourself you don't have to be afraid of anybody.
Yeah, I think like me, a lot of people don't understand what's write-offable and what ain't, and so because a lot of people doing write-offable things all the time and just don't realize it is.
Exactly. So if you go to that Building Wealth with the Pullums site, there's a book there. Get your money back. 420 tax deductions. Tax deductions you never knew about. Like I said, our friend Dr. Lynn Richardson, she documents them in alphabetical order in this book.
Yeah.
And tells you what you can and cannot deduct legally.
Appreciate that.
I see Twyla unmuted. Okay. Tina had her hand up.
Okay, can everybody hear me?
Yes, Twyla, we can.
Oh, I'm free. I have been muted the whole time. I couldn't do nothing, y'all. Okay. Thank you, Mr. Shawn Pullum, for the information you gave us tonight. My question is concerning the corporate record bookkeeping that you talked about. I do understand that, like, take it personally, but do you recommend, or because it's something that I really think is important, that that the company, whether you're LLC or what have you, that you hire a professional accountant or someone to, also as a double protection with your, your finances and the record keeping. Do you recommend that as well?
After a certain point, absolutely. It just depends. You have to look at, again, how much money is coming in, how much you putting out in expenses, how well are you documenting it? Because even if you have an accountant, they're still going to need the same receipts, documentation, and everything else that you'd have to provide to yourself. Now, for me, like with we've got a lot going on, so to us, it's worth the time and money for me to say I'll pay somebody to handle the accounting, the bookkeeping, and the tax preparation. I just pull out my financial reports and any W-2s, W-9s, anything else we got, and I send that all over to them and let them go ahead and generate the tax returns. But to do that, I still have to have done the accounting and the tracking and the business expenses, because I have to give them kind of a profit and loss sheet and an income versus expenses sheet versus just saying, okay, here are all my numbers and tossing them over the fence and saying, okay, there you go. But you can definitely, I mean, you definitely look at it and determine when the right time to engage an accounting professional, a tax professional is. You know, when it starts becoming more than you can mentally handle, and that might be right at the beginning, then it may be worth the time and money to go ahead and invest in it. Plus, we have another one of the instructors in the series, Miss Candy G. Martin, who is a tax professional who can give you far more depth on the best time to do accounting and bookkeeping. I have a background in computer science, and then I became an attorney. I never wanted to deal with accounting. Just not my gift, not my forte. But
Okay, thank you.
all right, Tina, you had a question?
I think you kind of answered mine, but I was wanting to know, how do you know what amount, like if you have a business that is up and down, what amount do you know? I think that's going to be someone else versus you. What you need to pay in or hold back to pay quarterly, or how often you have to pay your taxes so that you can kind of stay on top of them and not have to owe anything at the end of the year. But I think you said someone else is coming and maybe more
Yeah,
equipped
that's a
for
better
it.
question for our tax professional. That's gonna be one of the instructors.
And then I don't know if it was you that was going to be given the website where you can look up how to see if a name is available if you're just now starting out.
Um, I can. I don't, and I definitely can address that. So you're gonna want to do a name search on the Secretary of State website. So here in Texas, it's Texas Secretary of State. Um, and I'm trying to remember. I think they charge like a dollar or two or something for doing name searches. But then if you actually file paperwork under that same name after you charge, then after you've searched it, then they don't charge you for it again, or they'll refund that charge if you file paperwork under that same name afterwards. But you can definitely have to look at Secretary of State's website. You can Google the name as well just to see what comes up. Thank you, Jeanette. She pulled it in there. And the other thing you want to do is, if you're ever planning on potentially federally trademarking it, you're going to want to go to the uspto.gov and do a trademark search. Because what you would hate to do is come up with a name, come up with the company, form the company, get out there, get it going, get rolling, and then all of a sudden find out, oh wait, somebody else already has a federal trademark on this.
That makes sense.
So you never could protect the name nationally. Or you'll have a harder fight to protect the name nationally if you are in one set of goods and they're in a different set of goods. Depending on if the trademark attorney still feels that's going to cause some measure of confusion or not. So it's better to kind of check all those levels for a business name, for a company, when you're planning on engaging in that building or opening up that particular company. Check the USPTO trademark, check the Secretary of State, and then just Google the name, see what comes up. All right. Any other questions?
We have any other questions? You are definitely welcome to unmute or raise your hand and we make sure we get you. All right. I don't think we have any more questions. Great job, Shawn.
Thank you all so much. Appreciate the opportunity. hope to have been a benefit to you, and I look forward to seeing what you wonderful creative folks accomplish in the future.
Awesome. And make sure that you guys, I think most of you have registered for the next class that will be coming up next week. So we got these all the way up until I think the first or second week of March. So we look forward. I think next week we have, I think it's, she's going to be in, Miss Guimont. So she's going to be coming in with the taxes. So for all those tax questions, hold on, she's going to actually talk about those because I got a bunch of them myself. So I'm excited. So thank you all so much for joining. And without further ado, we're going to tell you all good night.
Good night, everyone.
Everybody.
Good night, y'all.